The storm had passed, but the house still smelled of wet wood and grief. Caleb Whitaker stood in the attic, the dim bulb above him flickering as if it too mourned the loss of his mother. Her funeral had been small, quiet, just the way she wanted. No sermons, no eulogies, just ashes and the whisper of wind through cemetery pines. He had come home only to settle affairs, sell the old place, empty out decades of memories and return to Chicago. But as he reached for a stack of yellowing photo albums tucked behind an old cedar chest, something slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. A letter. Its envelope was brittle with age, sealed but never mailed. His mother's handwriting curled elegantly across the front, "To be sent if I am gone." Inside, on thin blue stationery, the ink had faded, but the words pierced like glass. "Dear Caleb, if you're reading this, then I've passed, and there's something you must know. Your Aunt Eleanor, my sister, did not die in the influenza outbreak of 1919, as I told you. She vanished, without explanation, without a trace, and it happened at her school, St. Elora Academy in Somerset, England. They told us she drowned in the quarry, but there was no body, only her ribbon. I always knew they lied." Caleb's heart paused. He barely remembered Eleanor, only fragments from childhood stories. She had been a violin prodigy, the golden girl of the Whitaker family. Then, one day, gone. Just a tragedy in a generation full of them. He read on. Every 7 years a girl vanished from that school, always alone, always at night. The staff denied everything, but I've kept the clippings, the names, the patterns. It's real. I was there when Eleanor disappeared. I saw the light in the chapel that night. I heard the music. The letter ended abruptly. The ink smudged where a final sentence had been scratched out. Caleb stood frozen. The attic felt colder than before, as if the wind had crept in through the walls. He looked around, then crouched beside the cedar chest and opened it. Inside lay a box of letters, yellowed news clippings, and a sepia-toned photo of a stone building surrounded by mist. St. Elora Academy, 1917. Girls in uniform stood on the front steps, smiling. He turned the photo over, written in pencil. Eleanor, front row, third from left. She was beautiful, sharp eyes, proud chin, violin case in hand. Caleb traced her image with his thumb. There were articles too. Obituaries, missing person notices. 1912, 1919, 1926. A pattern forming. Always a girl, always a student at St. Elora. He didn't believe in ghosts. But something about the letter gripped him in a way logic couldn't dismiss. His mother had been grounded, practical. She'd never spoken of any of this, not once in 37 years. If she went to the trouble of writing this, it meant she believed it mattered. And if it mattered to her, it mattered to him. That night, he didn't sleep. He read every article, every note, every frantic scribble his mother had penned over the years. She had done her own research, secretly, across decades. There was a map of the grounds, a list of names, and in the corner of one page, underlined twice. It always happens on the 7th year. Always a girl. Always the chapel. By dawn, Caleb had booked a one-way ticket to England. This wasn't just a family mystery. It was a haunting. And he needed to know what happened to Eleanor Whitaker. If you're drawn to unsolved disappearances, hidden truths, and long-buried secrets, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting journeys like this one. What lies buried at St. Elora Academy may be darker than you think. The plane touched down in London under a grey sky, the kind that seemed to stretch endlessly, pressing low with damp weight. Caleb stepped into the chill of October with a single bag and a pocket full of questions. He hadn't left America in over a decade, but something about this journey felt older than that, like a thread that had been pulling at him since before he was born. His cab ride to Somerset wound through narrow roads, where ancient oaks leaned over fields veiled in mist. The countryside unfolded like a memory, foreign yet strangely familiar. Caleb watched the landscape blur past, his fingers resting on the envelope in his coat. Inside were his mother's notes, the photo of Eleanor and the list of names. He kept rereading them. Each one had vanished under similar circumstances, and always during autumn. There was something rhythmic about it, something timed and deliberate. The driver, a man named Thomas with a thick accent and a quiet manner, glanced at him through the rear-view mirror. "You headed to Larkenhill then?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "That's where the school was, right?" Thomas's grip on the wheel tightened. "Aye, St. Elora's, long gone now. Nobody lives out there anymore." "You know much about it?" The man hesitated. "My gran used to say the place was cursed. Kids went missing. Folks stopped asking questions after a while. Got easier that way." Caleb looked out the window again. "You ever hear of Eleanor Whittaker?" "No, sir, but there were many." Thomas paused. "Too many." By the time they reached Larkenhill, the fog had thickened and the village looked deserted. Stone cottages lined the streets, shuttered and lifeless. A pub stood closed with boards nailed across the windows. Even the post office was abandoned, the glass cracked and vines curling through the doorframe. Thomas parked in front of a gate rusted shut. "This is as far as I go," he said. Caleb stepped out. The wind hit him like a warning, cold, damp, whispering. Ahead, beyond the gate and a winding path lost in overgrowth, lay the remains of St. Elora Academy. He walked. The crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots echoed through the silence. The trees around the path grew dense, limbs arching overhead like a cathedral ceiling. Shadows shifted with the breeze, and for a moment he thought he heard distant music, soft, almost delicate, a violin. But there was nothing, just the sound of his own breath and the whisper of wind through hollow branches. At the end of the path the school revealed itself. Even in ruin, St. Elora loomed with a cold kind of elegance. Its stone walls, mottled with moss and thyme, stood tall against the sky. Windows gaped open like empty eyes. The roof was partially collapsed, and ivy strangled the once grand archways. A pair of iron doors hung crooked on their hinges. Caleb stepped through the threshold. The main hall was a skeleton of what once had been, floorboards warped and broken, portraits charred and cracked, dust thick as ash. The scent of mildew was sharp, layered with something older, something bitter. He wandered room to room, a classroom with overturned desks, a library with books eaten by mold, a music room with a broken piano missing half its keys. And there in the dormitory wing was a hallway lined with rusted bed frames. He stopped at the third one on the left. Carved into the bedpost, barely visible beneath peeling paint, was a name, Eleanor. His pulse quickened. She had been here, slept here, laughed here, vanished here. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed frame, pulling the photo from his coat. He held it up, matching the layout behind the girls. That same hallway, that same corridor. And there she was, front row, third from left. The silence felt heavier now, like the walls were holding their breath. He folded the photo and stood. Somewhere in these ruins lay the truth. He could feel it. And he wasn't leaving without it. Caleb returned the next morning, the fog lifting just enough to reveal more of the academy's shattered beauty. He hadn't expected to find anyone. The town was dead, the school a carcass. But as he circled the rear courtyard, a faint rustle stopped him. Behind a collapsed wall, a woman in a long black coat stood quietly among the ruins, placing wildflowers on the ground beside a scorched stone pillar. She looked up before he could speak, her grey eyes sharp beneath the rim of her hat. "You're not from here," she said, her voice dry and unmistakably English. "No," Caleb replied, "but I think you know why I've come." She studied him. "You've got her eyes, Eleanor's." He froze. "You knew her." "I knew of her," the woman said, kneeling to adjust the flowers. "Everyone in this place did once, but time erases what people are too afraid to remember." Caleb stepped closer. "I'm Caleb Whittaker. Eleanor was my aunt. I found records, letters. My mother said something terrible happened here." "She wasn't wrong," the woman murmured. "I'm Agnes Rook. I was the housekeeper during the school's final years. I saw enough to make peace with silence, but silence isn't peace, is it?" Caleb shook his head. Agnes rose, brushing dirt from her coat. "Come with me." She led him past twisted iron fences, and crumbled stone toward a small cottage hidden by hedgerows. Inside it was warm and oddly timeless, books lining every wall, the air smelling of lavender and coal. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. She motioned to a chair by the fire and disappeared into the next room. When she returned, she carried a leather-bound journal and a cardboard box. "You're not the first to ask questions," she said, "but you might be the last." She opened the box. Inside were yellowed photos, torn documents, handwritten lists, and something darker. Burned scraps, half-legible letters, a strip of cloth marked with blood. "I kept what I could," Agnes said. "I don't know why. Maybe I hoped someone like you would come." Caleb sifted through the items. Some he'd seen in his mother's collection, but others were new. Clippings from obscure local papers, police reports stamped with red ink, and photos of missing girls. "All of them disappeared?" he asked quietly. Agnes nodded. "One every 7 years, always a girl, always during the autumn term." He picked up a faded photo. A blonde girl, about 15, stared solemnly at the camera. Her name, Margaret Crowley, was scribbled on the back. "She vanished in 1933, Agnes said. "No body, no farewell, just gone." "And the staff?" Caleb asked. "The police?" "They called it misadventure every time. Drowned, run off, wartime confusion. Girls were delicate, they said, prone to nerves and foolishness." "But it wasn't foolishness." "No," she replied. "It was something else. Something older." Caleb leaned back, staring into the fire. "My mother mentioned a light in the chapel," he said, "and music." Agnes's face tightened. "You should be careful where you walk after dusk. That music still plays sometimes." He turned to her. What was this place, really? Her hands trembled slightly as she poured them tea. It was a school, yes, but it was also something more. A place that demanded a price for its grandeur, and someone kept paying it. Caleb stared at the flames, his thoughts racing. "I need to know what happened to Eleanor," he said. "All of it." Agnes met his gaze. "Then you'll need to go deeper than anyone ever dared. And you'll have to be willing to lose things you don't yet know you're holding." Outside, the wind scraped across the walls like nails on stone. Inside, the silence between them thickened, and the past waited, patient and unburied. The wind had turned bitter by afternoon, carrying the scent of something damp and ancient. Caleb returned to the academy ruins alone, Agnes's warnings echoing in his thoughts. She had given him keys, old, iron, rusted, and told him where to look. Not at the chapel, not yet, but to the east wing where the classrooms once stood. The double doors groaned open, protesting every inch. Inside, the corridor was darker than memory, cloaked in dust and the slow decay of things left unspoken. The air smelled like mold and burnt paper, thick with rot. Shattered desks lay in piles as if thrown in some desperate frenzy. He moved through the gloom, light slanting in through broken windows. Each step stirred up the dust of a century, chalk, dried leaves, bones of small animals. In the first classroom, a faded map of the world still clung to the wall. Europe bled into shadow, the edges torn. Beneath it, a desk had been carved with initials. Caleb brushed the wood, E.W. He paused. The name was hers, Eleanor. In that moment, the air seemed to shift. Not colder, but more attentive, like something unseen had become aware of him. He kept moving. Past the classrooms, he reached the music room. Here, the scent changed. Wax and smoke. The piano sat in the far corner, its lid warped, keys chipped like broken teeth. On the wall, remnants of music sheets curled in decay, their notes barely visible. Beneath the window stood a chair and violin case, empty, but still gleaming under a film of dust. Caleb approached, kneeling to open the case. The velvet lining inside was torn, and something sharp pricked his finger. He recoiled, inspecting the wound. Just a scratch. But a single drop of blood fell onto the lining, and then he heard it. Faint, unmistakable. A violin. 3 notes. Low, soft, unfinished. He turned, but the room was empty. The sound vanished as quickly as it came, like breath on glass. His pulse thudded. There was no wind, no power, no living soul but him. And yet, someone, or something, had played. He backed out slowly, heart racing. As he stepped into the hall, a painting caught his eye. It had fallen behind a cabinet, frame cracked, glass missing. He pulled it free, wiping away the dust. It was a portrait. 5 girls in uniform, standing in front of the chapel's heavy oak doors. One of them was Eleanor. She stood off-center, her expression unreadable. The others smiled faintly, as if posing for something they didn't understand. Caleb turned it over, nothing written. But he noticed something odd. One of the girls, third from the left, had no face. Not scratched out, not damaged, just missing. Blank canvas where features should have been. He placed the painting down gently and moved toward the end of the hall, where stairs descended into darkness. The key Agnes gave him matched the heavy lock on the door at the base. It opened with a reluctant click. The smell hit him like a wave. Mildew, wax, something else. Something wrong. He stepped into the cellar. Stone walls closed in around him, slick with moisture. The floor was uneven, covered in remnants. Broken candlesticks, scorched hymnals, feathers soaked in age. At the far end, a door reinforced with iron hinges stood half open. Behind it, a room with a low ceiling. Mirrors lined the walls, most shattered. In the center, a crude circle carved into the stone, surrounded by symbols Caleb didn't recognize. He crouched. Inside the circle, black wax had melted and pooled like tar. Scorched bone fragments lay within it. Nearby, a student's shoe. Too small for an adult. His breath caught. This wasn't ritual. This was violence masquerading as reverence. He stood, heart hammering. And then, faint but clear, came the violin again. One note. Drawn long, like a breath being held. The next day brought colder winds and darker skies. Caleb returned to Agnes's cottage, sleep-deprived and shaken. He told her what he had found beneath the academy, about the wax, the burned bone, the shoe. She didn't flinch. "I warned you," she said, pouring him tea with steady hands. "You've crossed the veil now. It won't forget you." He asked her about the circle, the symbols, the mirrors. She nodded and reached for a wooden box beside the hearth, its lid etched with a sigil that looked eerily similar to what he'd seen underground. "This," she said, opening it, "belonged to Headmistress Aldwyn." Inside were brittle papers, a silver brooch, and a leather-bound journal tied shut with twine. Agnes untied it and handed it to him. "She ran the school from 1906 until 1943, she said. "Oversaw at least 6 of the disappearances. Some say she was a genius, others," she hesitated, "say she served something older than God." Caleb opened the journal, its spine groaning from age. The entries were dated, neat and eerily composed. No rambling, no emotion, just records, thoughts, observations. April 3rd, 1912. The girl is gone. No sign, no trace. 3rd in a pattern. They won't question it much longer. I feel its presence closer now. The cycle must be honored. He frowned and flipped forward. October 12th, 1919. Eleanor Whittaker is chosen. She shines too brightly. It always seeks the brightest. I will prepare her room. She must not suspect until the night. The others grow restless, but the agreement is older than all of us. We owe the hollow one. He froze. The ink here was darker, heavier, as if pressed with a shaking hand. I must write this plainly in case my mind fractures. The entity is not of flesh nor spirit. It is hunger. It drinks potential, feasts on youth, and sings with voices it has stolen. It speaks only through music. It promises silence in return. Agnes watched him as he turned the pages. She believed in it, Caleb said. No, Agnes corrected softly. She served it. He continued reading. August 7th, 1933. Margaret has gone. The signs remain. The chapel still echoes. I am weary, but the cycle demands balance. I have seen it in dreams, the black gate, the mirror eye, the endless hall of stolen songs. If the price is not paid, the gates open wide. Caleb looked up. What did she mean by gates? Agnes sat down, her face pale. She believed the chapel was a seal, that the rituals fed something sleeping beneath it, not to summon, but to keep it from waking. He ran a hand through his hair. What about the students, the staff? Did no one notice what was happening? They noticed, she said bitterly, but fear makes obedience. And the academy's prestige bought silence. Parents wanted music, scholarships, royal invitations. They never asked where the echoes came from. Caleb returned to the journal. November 2nd, 1943. They've come for me. Authorities, men in coats. It is over. I leave the circle unfinished, the cycle broken. May they forgive me. May it never rise again. That was the final entry. No signature. No farewell. Agnes stood and walked to the window, staring out toward the woods where the chapel steeple barely pierced the horizon. She was taken that year, she said, not by the entity, by the state. They closed the school for a time, but it reopened, and the disappearances continued. Caleb closed the journal and held it tight. Eleanor hadn't just vanished, she had been chosen. A piece in a ritual sustained by silence, cloaked in tradition, and orchestrated by a woman who believed she was keeping something far worse at bay. But if the cycle was broken in 1943, why did it continue? That question hung heavier than the rest, and the only place left to ask it was the chapel. The journal haunted Caleb. Not just its contents, but the calmness in the way Headmistress Aldwyn had written about horror, clinical, unflinching, as if sacrifice were part of a necessary order. He couldn't stop thinking about her final words. The cycle broken. May it never rise again. But the disappearances had continued long after her arrest. He needed a timeline. Back in Agnes's cottage, he spread the evidence across the table. Names, dates, faces. Some had come from his mother's collection, others from Agnes's private archives. A few he'd unearthed himself. He wrote them out, one by one. 1912, Helen Vance. 1919, Eleanor Whittaker. 1926, Abigail Norcross. 1933, Margaret Crowley. 1940, Eliza Byrne. 1947, Josephine Lamont. 1954, Claire Addington. 1961, Sylvia Knox. 1968, Rosalind Hargrave. 1975, Beatrice Wren. Each 7 years, each a girl, each aged somewhere between 12 and 17, and not one ever found. Caleb leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy. 10 girls over 6 decades. The same pattern. No overlap, no random gaps, like a metronome, like a heartbeat. He searched for outliers, any year when nothing had happened, but there were none. Not even during the war, not even after Aldwyn had been removed. He glanced at the journal again. The cycle broken. No, that had been a lie, she told herself, or maybe a hope she clung to before they dragged her away. Either way, the pattern had not broken. He returned to the photographs. The older ones were fading. Most showed groups of girls in uniforms lined up before doorways, stone arches, hedgerows. Some smiled, others didn't. But one detail repeated across the decades. The chapel. It appeared in nearly every image, sometimes in the background, sometimes front and center, always there. The chapel was the anchor. Agnes had said as much, a seal, a boundary, a debt. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that whatever governed this cycle lived beneath that building, or within it. He turned to the list of victims, all from different families, different social classes, but each one had been marked in school records as promising. Musicians, scholars, dancers, artists. One girl had spoken 4 languages by age 13. Another had painted a mural that still hung in Somerset's courthouse. Each girl had a spark, and each was extinguished. He looked at Eleanor's school portrait again. Not the posed one from the photo his mother saved, but another, smaller image Agnes had found. Candid. She stood by the window, unaware the photo had been taken, violin in hand, eyes cast to the side. She looked distant, like she already knew. Caleb's hand trembled as he placed the photo back. This wasn't just random misfortune, it was curation, selection. Something or someone had chosen them, not for who they were, but for what they could have been. And that thought cut deeper than any of the others. He stood and walked to the window. The chapel tower was visible again, framed by twilight. It loomed like a gravestone, silent and unmoving, yet charged with weight. Agnes entered quietly, handing him a cup of tea. "You see it now, don't you?" she said. He nodded. "Every 7 years, like clockwork." She sank into the chair beside him. And it wasn't just the girls who suffered. The school's energy changed after each one. The light dimmed. The laughter faded. The rooms grew colder. Why didn't anyone stop it? "They tried," she whispered. "But each time someone asked too many questions, they were removed, transferred, dismissed, or they simply forgot." Caleb turned to her. "Forgot? There are places that erase." That feed on forgetting. St. Elora was one of them. He looked again at the tower. Something had kept this cycle alive long after its creator was gone. Something with rhythm, with need. But needs could be interrupted, and cycles could be broken, if one knew where to strike. It took 2 days and half a dozen calls to locate him. Most believed he had died decades ago. But a nurse at a private facility in Exeter confirmed he was still alive. Barely. Silas Dart. He had disappeared from St. Elora in 1933, the same year as Margaret Crowley. But unlike the others, Silas had returned. 7 years later. Unchanged. Caleb wasn't sure what he expected as he entered the care home. The receptionist guided him down a sterile hallway, then gestured to a door with chipped white paint. "He doesn't speak much," she said. "He draws, he hums. But don't say the name of the school. It upsets him." Inside, the room was dim and sparse. An old man sat hunched in a chair, wrapped in a wool blanket, eyes vacant. On a tray beside him lay dozens of torn pages covered in symbols and jagged figures. Some looked like runes, others like eyes, endless eyes. Caleb approached slowly. "Mr. Dart?" No response. "I'm Caleb Whittaker. My aunt, Eleanor. She was at St. Elora in 1919. The man flinched ever so slightly. Caleb sat across from him. "You disappeared in 1933. You came back in 1940. That's not possible." "But you did." Silas blinked, lips parting slightly. Then, with trembling fingers, he picked up a charcoal pencil and drew a spiral. At its center, a mouth. No face. Just a mouth, open wide. "What is it?" Caleb asked. The old man's voice was barely more than air. "It sings." Caleb leaned closer. Caleb leaned. "What sings?" Silas's hand hovered, then scribbled something frantic. Lines slashed across the page, symbols overlapping, until the paper tore. "Music in the walls," he whispered. "It pulled me down, down through the light. The doors weren't real. They closed after I passed." "What was there?" Caleb asked. Silas's eyes snapped to his, and for a moment they were clear, terrified, lucid. "They let it feed," he rasped. "They gave us." Caleb swallowed hard. "But you came back." Silas began to rock, muttering, "Wrong one, wrong one. It spat me out. Said I wasn't bright enough. I heard her screaming, over and over. The girl with the violin." "Eleanor," Caleb said. The old man screamed. It was sudden, piercing, high and cracked like metal tearing. The nurse burst in, restraining his arms gently, whispering reassurances as Caleb stepped back. She looked at him with tired eyes. "That's why we don't say names. Especially not hers." "Why hers?" Caleb asked, but she shook her head. "He screams every time, like he's still hearing her." As they walked back toward the lobby, Caleb glanced at the drawings again. Circles, mouths, altars. Children with blacked-out eyes. And at the bottom of one page, written in crooked letters, "It waits. It remembers. It wants more." Outside, the sky had darkened again. Caleb lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the nurse's final words echoing in his mind. He's aged only 10 years since 1940, but he was gone for 7. They ran every test. No one could explain it. Caleb stared at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun clung to the edge of the clouds. Silas had returned, but wrong, rejected, cast out, not because he resisted, but because he didn't shine bright enough. That meant the entity wasn't feeding randomly. It tasted, it chose, and Eleanor had been more than bright. She had burned. The violin, the music, the chapel. Caleb crushed the cigarette beneath his heel. If Silas had heard her screaming from the other side, then part of her had never left. Something of her remained, trapped, echoing in the dark. And if that was true, he had to find a way to reach her. Even if it meant following the same path Silas had walked, even if it meant passing through doors that weren't real. The sky hung low as Caleb crossed the grounds again. The chapel waited like a sentinel, its shadow longer than the structure itself. He hadn't dared enter before. But now, after Silas, after the journal, there was no question. Whatever dwelled beneath St. Elora, this was its heart. The heavy doors creaked open, resisting as though reluctant to admit him. Inside, dust floated like ash in still air. The pews were broken, some upturned, others half buried in rubble. At the far end, the altar stood untouched, stone, smooth, too clean. Above it, stained glass depicted the Archangel Michael defeating the serpent, but the serpent's face was missing. Caleb stepped forward, the boards groaning underfoot. He had brought a flashlight, but the moment he clicked it on, something shifted in the air, like pressure dropped, like sound bent. He turned it off. Silence returned. Not peaceful, but watchful. Behind the altar he found the narrow stairwell Agnes had mentioned. It spiraled downward, carved from stone, damp and slick. As he descended, the temperature dropped. With each step a sound began to rise, not loud but unmistakable, humming, soft, disjointed, melancholic. Not one voice, several, out of sync, a choir. He reached the bottom. A wide basement chamber opened before him, lit only by the faintest glow, sickly green leaking from cracks in the stone. Mirrors lined the walls here too, many broken, others fogged with age. Beneath them, robes lay in piles, black and rotted. Some still bore the Academy's crest, now half-eaten by mold. At the center stood the circle, the same as before, carved into the ground, filled with wax and ash. But now, something pulsed beneath it. A vibration almost imperceptible, like breath moving through the stone. He stepped around it carefully, eyes scanning the room. That's when he saw the trapdoor, half concealed behind a shattered lectern, its edges rusted and warped. A sigil was burned into the wood, unmistakable from Aldwyn's journal. A warning, or a seal. He hesitated, then opened it. The stench hit first, raw, sweet rot, layered with something floral and wrong. He gagged but descended anyway, clutching the ladder with white knuckles. The tunnel below was narrow, walls damp, ceiling low, and the humming grew louder. Not a melody, not quite. Each voice wandered, searching. Then, faintly, strings, a violin. One, mournful, deliberate note, then another. He followed the sound, the tunnel bent, widened, and then opened into a chamber so vast it seemed impossible, as if space itself had shifted to allow it. The ceiling arched high into shadow, columns of stone twisted upward like frozen smoke. Water pooled at the edges of the floor, black and still, and scattered around the chamber stood statues. No, not statues. Figures, girls, dozens of them, petrified, frozen in place. Eyes wide, mouths open, reaching, pleading. Each wore an academy uniform. Each was captured mid-motion, as if stopped in the instant of scream or song. Caleb stepped forward, heart hammering. The violin echoed again, clearer this time. He turned and saw her. Eleanor. She stood near the far wall, eyes closed, bow held mid-air, chin resting on the instrument's neck. Frozen, ageless, perfect. No, he whispered. She hadn't just vanished. She had been preserved, trapped. The humming rose, louder, now coordinated, swelling, a harmony of fear and longing. And from the dark behind her came movement. A figure, no face, just skin stretched smooth. Its mouth, a black oval, opened wide. The sound came from within it, all the voices, all the notes. It was not music, it was memory, devoured and replayed. Caleb stumbled back, heart slamming. The thing did not move fast. It didn't need to. It only stared, if it could be called that, and opened wider, and from its void came a sound that did not belong in any world. A scream made of strings. Caleb barely remembered climbing out. His clothes were soaked, his hands scraped raw, and a deep hum clung to his bones long after he'd fled the underground chamber. The thing hadn't followed, but its presence still lingered, like a thought that refused to end. Back at Agnes's cottage, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the frozen image of Eleanor, violin poised, expression serene, yet somehow hollow, like a soul caught mid-breath. Agnes entered quietly and handed him something wrapped in cloth. "I didn't show you this before," she said. "It was hidden in the chapel wall. I found it after the fire in '79. Inside the cloth was a notebook, thin, with soft blue binding. The name written in careful ink, Eleanor Whittaker." His throat tightened. He opened it with trembling fingers. "October 9th, 1919. They chose me to play at the Harvest concert. Headmistress Aldwyn herself congratulated me. She said my music had the kind of clarity this school was built to celebrate. I'm proud. But the way she looked at me, it didn't feel like praise." October 14th. Strange sounds from the chapel last night. Not footsteps, not voices, like wind passing through a flute, but lower, heavier. Some of the other girls are whispering about Margaret Crowley. I asked where she'd gone. No one answered. October 15th. A letter from home arrived today. Mama says my playing must be reaching heaven itself. I wish she could hear what I hear. There's something beneath the chapel. I feel it when I practice, like the floor breathes. October 16th. I woke up, and my violin was moved, just slightly. The bow was resting across the case. I hadn't left it like that. October 17th. Tonight is the concert. I've chosen the Meditation from Thais. It's beautiful, tragic. I think I understand tragedy better now. The next page was stained with something. Water, maybe. But the ink bled. October 18th. After the performance, they asked me to stay behind, said the headmistress wanted to speak. I was flattered. I followed the staff into the chapel. The next sentence was shakier, hurried. There was no one else inside. October 18th later. They gave me something to drink. It tasted bitter. My limbs feel heavy. I don't know where I am. I hear music, but I'm not playing. The air is so cold, I can't move. The walls are breathing. The final entry was nearly illegible. The writing panicked, scrawled across the page like a scream trapped in ink. It's here. It's in the mirror. My bow is rising, but my hands aren't moving. I see them, the others. They're singing without mouths. Oh, God. The door is opening. Caleb closed the notebook, his breath caught in his chest. Agnes stared into the fire. They always took the ones who gave too much of themselves, the ones whose talent came from some deeper well. She was awake when it happened, Caleb said. She knew. And she was used anyway, Agnes whispered. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he rose, walked to the window, and stared out into the darkness. The chapel was hidden now, but its shadow still pressed against the landscape. I saw her, he said finally. She's still there, not alive, but not gone. Agnes looked up. Then you know what must be done. He nodded. If Eleanor had been consumed but left behind, if her last song still lingered beneath the stone, then maybe she wasn't waiting to be saved. Maybe she was waiting to be freed. And if the door had opened once, it could open again. But this time, he wouldn't walk through it blindly. He'd go knowing what waited on the other side. And this time, it wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would be a reckoning. That night, sleep came only in fragments. When it did, it dragged Caleb into places he didn't recognize. Hallways intact, floors polished, sunlight warm through stained glass. St. Elora was alive. Not as it had been in ruins, but as it was decades ago, before the decay, before the silence. The halls hummed with the subtle order of a school in session. Girls walked in pairs down corridors, books in hand, whispers soft and curious. Their uniforms were immaculate. The air smelled of lavender polish and ink. Caleb wandered through it, unseen, or perhaps not unseen, but unacknowledged. The teachers were familiar from photographs. Headmistress Aldwyn stood by the chapel entrance, speaking to a young girl with auburn braids. Her expression was warm, her hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. He moved past them, his steps making no sound, drawn by the faintest melody echoing through the walls. The violin. It was coming from the music room. He pushed open the door and found her. Eleanor. She sat by the window, sunlight washing over her face, bow in motion. Her playing was slower here, more deliberate. There was no audience, no pressure, only her and the sound. He stepped closer. She looked up, and this time she saw him. Her expression didn't change. No fear, no surprise, only sadness. She mouthed a word. Run. Then everything shifted. The music distorted, notes bending into something wrong. The walls began to pulse, the air thickened. Shadows twisted behind the glass. Eleanor dropped the violin and it shattered without sound. Caleb turned, but the door was gone. The windows were black. A low hum filled the room, familiar and unbearable. He stumbled backward into the corridor, now dark, flickering. The students were gone. The paintings on the walls had changed, each one now showing girls with hollow eyes and twisted mouths. He ran. The halls lengthened. The floors warped beneath his feet. Every turn led back to the chapel doors, and behind them something breathed. He woke with a gasp, soaked in sweat, heart hammering. Agnes was there, silent in the doorway, eyes heavy with understanding. "You saw it," she said. He nodded slowly. "It's not just memories, it's still functioning, still feeding." "It's a dream for them," she murmured. "But a prison." He stood, wiping his face. "She told me to run." "That's what it wants you to do," Agnes replied. "Run, leave, forget." Caleb clenched his fists. "But she's still in there." Agnes hesitated. "If you go again, you may not return." He met her gaze. "If I don't, they never will." He left before dawn. Fog covered the academy grounds again, but this time it didn't deter him. He moved with purpose, heart steady. The chapel loomed ahead, but it no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a mouth, waiting to open. He stepped inside, into the dark. But this time, the darkness greeted him like an old friend. The altar glowed faintly, the mirrors along the walls intact again. The circle beneath the floor pulsed like a second heart. He heard music, not a violin, but a piano. From somewhere below, and voices laughing, whispering, calling names long forgotten. The academy wasn't just haunted, it was alive, not in the way a place is remembered, but in the way something feeds. Every dream, every fear, every note played in its walls added to its breath. It had become a vessel, a creature, a sanctuary for something ancient, and Eleanor was trapped in its lungs. Caleb descended again, but this time not as a stranger. This time he came to confront it. The spiral stairwell groaned under Caleb's weight as he descended once more. This time the air felt different, charged, expectant. He had no torch, no map, only the weight of Eleanor's name in his chest and the rhythm of distant strings guiding him forward. When he reached the chamber beneath the chapel, the circle on the floor was no longer dormant. The wax glistened like fresh tar. The mirrors reflected more than just his outline. Glimpses of others flickered inside, girls in uniform, mouths open in soundless harmony. He ignored them, moved past the pile of robes, past the altar cracked at its base, to the far wall, where a door had once been sealed. Now it waited, slightly ajar. Its surface was carved with symbols he recognized from the headmistress's journal, runes for silence, for offering, for memory. But beneath them, a single phrase in English, etched as though with trembling hands. "The debt is eternal." Caleb pressed the door open. It let out a deep sigh as if exhaling centuries. Beyond it, a tunnel of rough-hewn stone stretched downward, lined with candle stubs melted to bone. The walls pulsed faintly, and the floor was damp with something that wasn't quite water. The hum returned, deeper this time. No longer melody. A resonance, like breath through a throat too large for the world. He moved forward. The tunnel twisted, narrowed, then opened into a cavern far vaster than the one before. A pit sat at its center, ringed by broken columns. From within the pit rose the violin's song, not played but conjured, pure, mournful, persistent. At the edge stood a pedestal, and on it a small wooden box. He approached. It was carved with delicate flowers, roses, violets, the kind Eleanor used to sketch in her childhood notebooks, according to his mother. The clasp was sealed with a wax emblem bearing the Academy's crest. He opened it. Inside lay a ribbon, faded burgundy, frayed at the edges, and beneath it a slip of parchment. To silence the song, one must name the grief. He held the ribbon in shaking hands, realizing he'd seen it before, folded inside the letter his mother had hidden away. It was all that had been found after Eleanor vanished. He pressed it to his lips. The air shifted, the humming stopped. Then came the whispering. From every shadow, every crack, voices rose, not words, but utterances of despair. Cries cut short, prayers unfinished, breath caught mid-sob, and above them all a single voice. Caleb. He turned. Eleanor stood at the edge of the pit, not frozen, not ethereal, but present, her eyes full of tears, her hands shaking. "You shouldn't have come," she said. He stepped toward her. "I had to. I saw you. I heard you." She closed her eyes. "It's awake now." A sound erupted from the pit, wet, gurgling, rising. Caleb backed away as a shape began to emerge. It was not a body, not a form. It was absence made visible, a mass of void, of teeth without order, mouths without sound. Eleanor turned to it. It was never supposed to last this long. They promised one life for many, but it grew greedy. Caleb reached for her. "Then let's end it." She looked at him, and something inside her broke. "I can't leave," she whispered. "Not while it still remembers my name." The creature stirred. The pit pulsed. Caleb raised the ribbon. "Then we make it forget." The walls shook. The cavern groaned. The void turned toward him. And the song, once mournful, now screamed. The scream shattered the cavern's silence, more felt than heard. Vibrations rolling through Caleb's chest like waves through stone. He dropped to one knee, ears ringing, eyes locked on the pit as the creature emerged fully. It had no face, just a surface that moved, writhing like smoke caught in frozen glass. Dozens of mouths opened and closed across its body, some weeping, some silent, all yearning. From within them, voices rose, familiar, intimate. His mother's, Agnes's, even his own. The hollow one had no form because it didn't need one. It was memory, need, grief, hunger. It fed on what could have been. "Don't look at it," Eleanor cried. But he couldn't look away. It was showing him. Eleanor at 16, walking through the chapel doors. Margaret Crowley, clutching a book as the light dimmed. Josephine Lamont, whispering a hymn before her final breath. Each vision burned into his mind, etched with impossible clarity. He saw the moment each girl was chosen, not for what they were, but for what they might become. And then the moment they were taken. He reeled back, gasping. "It remembers everything." Eleanor nodded. "And it holds us in those memories. That's how it keeps us. We're echoes trapped inside its voice." He stood, holding the ribbon like a talisman. "Then we cut the echo." The hollow one shifted, twisting its shape into something nearly human. A girl's silhouette formed, violin at her side, bow raised. Eleanor's image, but wrong. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for a mouth that opened too wide. "You came too far," it spoke in a voice layered with dozens of others. "You carried her memory. You gave it shape. And now, she belongs again." "No," Caleb said, stepping forward. "She belongs to herself." The creature tilted its head. "She sang beautifully, and you brought the chorus." The ground cracked beneath him. The walls pulsed with sound. All around them, frozen girls began to stir, mouths twitching, hands rising. "They're waking," Eleanor whispered. Caleb stepped into the circle surrounding the pit. The ribbon burned in his hand, but he didn't let go. "I name her grief," he said aloud. "I name the moment she was stolen. I name the silence they left behind." The Hollow One recoiled slightly. Caleb shouted, voice shaking, "I name her Eleanor Whittaker. I name what she could have been, and I take it back." A shockwave burst from the circle, hurling him backward. The ribbon flew from his grip, landing at Eleanor's feet. She picked it up, fingers trembling. For a moment her eyes glowed with something bright. Hope. "I remember who I am," she said. The Hollow One screamed again, but this time it was not the sound of power. It was fear. The frozen girls were moving now, all of them, turning toward the pit. Their voices rose, not in anguish, but in defiance. One note, pure and sharp, then another, a harmony of release. And the Hollow One began to unravel. Its body tore at the seams, the mouths vanishing one by one. The pit cracked wider, and within it light began to rise, light that burned like morning breaking through years of dusk. Eleanor stepped beside Caleb. "It's not gone yet," she said. "It's breaking, but it will fight." He nodded. "Then we fight back." But before they could move, the cavern began to collapse. Stones fell. The ground split. The seal was breaking, and the price of breaking it was the very earth it had poisoned. Caleb grabbed her hand. "If we end this now," he said, "we end it for everyone." Eleanor held the ribbon tightly, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first note Eleanor played cut through the chaos like a blade, pure, sharp, mournful, but unmistakably alive. The Hollow One screamed. Not from rage, but from something deeper, recognition. Around them the chamber trembled. Stones cracked, mirrors shattered. The frozen girls wept without tears, their mouths forming words Caleb could not hear, but somehow understood. "Release me, remember me. Let me go." The music swelled. Eleanor played not with skill, but with memory. Every measure pulled from her what the Hollow One had stolen. Childhood, laughter, longing. Her song stitched together the silence with sorrow and defiance. Caleb stood beside her, shielding her as debris rained down. The light from the pit pulsed in rhythm with the music, brightening each time her bow moved across the strings. And then the Hollow One surged. It lashed out, not physically but with thought, with voice. It whispered to Caleb in his father's voice, in his mother's. "She left you, just like they all did. She chose the song over you. She's already gone." He staggered, clutching his head, the words piercing like thorns. But Eleanor didn't stop. She stepped into the circle, eyes closed, ribbon tied around her wrist. The ground cracked beneath her, but she held firm, her music now rising higher and faster. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something fierce, almost joyful. Caleb forced himself upright. He shouted through the roar, "Keep playing!" The Hollow One shrieked, its form unraveling. The mouths fused shut, the smooth skin cracking. Light bled from the fractures like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Then the pit exploded, not outward, but upward, a column of light and sound rising through the center of the chamber. Within it, shadows twisted and vanished, one by one, like names being erased from a cursed ledger. The girls cried out. Their voices joined Eleanor's melody, a full choir rising in crescendo. And the Hollow One began to fall apart. It wasn't dying, it was forgetting. Piece by piece it lost the echoes, the memories, the grief. The very things it fed on were being reclaimed. Eleanor opened her eyes. "It's breaking," she whispered. Caleb reached for her. "Then end it." She nodded. Her final note rang out like a bell in a void, and silence followed. True silence. The pit collapsed inward. The chamber cracked, then split in two, stone walls groaning as they gave way. Water surged from the edges, cold and black, swallowing everything. Caleb pulled Eleanor back, slipping on wet stone, dragging her up the collapsing stairwell. Behind them, the Hollow One let out one last sound. Not a scream, not a voice, but a sigh, as if relieved. They reached the upper chapel just as the floor gave way beneath them. The altar shattered, the walls buckled. Caleb threw himself over Eleanor, shielding her as the steeple crashed into the pews in a storm of glass and dust. Then, stillness. A soft wind. Morning light filtering through broken beams. They were alive. Barely. Eleanor sat up slowly, coughing. Her violin was gone, swallowed by the pit, but the ribbon remained, now white, the burgundy washed away. She looked at Caleb. "I heard them," she said. "All of them. And then they were gone." He nodded, breathless. "You freed them." "No," she replied. "We remembered them." And that, in the end, was what broke the cycle. Not fire, not force, but memory. Reclaimed and returned. Outside the world felt new, but St. Elora was gone, and what it had been would never rise again. The wind outside was sharper now, colder, as if something had been exhaled from deep beneath the earth. Caleb and Eleanor stood among the rubble of the chapel, breathing hard, listening to a silence that finally felt honest. No humming, no strings, no voices that didn't belong. St. Elora was dying. Not burning, not crumbling in violence, but exhaling, like a body at the end of breath. The school's stone walls, once proud and towering, had begun to bow inward. Ivy that once clung like veins now withered. The trees surrounding the grounds shed their leaves in waves, blanketing the ground with golden ash. They walked out slowly together. Behind them, the chapel collapsed completely, the steeple folding in like a closing eye. The sound wasn't loud. It was soft, satisfied. Caleb glanced back one last time. Where once stood St. Elora Academy, only a scar remained, stone and soil disrupted, but no ruin to mourn. Just space clean and cleared, as though it had never truly belonged to this world. A figure waited at the edge of the woods. Agnes. She stood with her hands clasped, eyes wide, lips parted, not with fear but awe. Eleanor saw her and stepped forward. Agnes choked on her breath. "It can't be." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Hello, Mrs. Rook." Agnes stumbled forward, pressing a hand to Eleanor's cheek. "I buried your name." "I buried it for decades." "And now," Eleanor whispered, "you can let it breathe." The older woman wept silently. They sat together for a while in the clearing, watching as morning spread across the horizon. The first true morning that place had seen in years. Caleb broke the quiet. "What happens now?" Agnes looked to the horizon. "Now the land heals, but not by forgetting. By remembering, truthfully, fully." He nodded. They walked back to the village. It had changed too. The pub was still boarded, the cottages still crumbling, but the air felt lighter. The weight that had hung over it, the silence that lived in its soil, had lifted. People emerged from houses Caleb didn't know were still occupied. They looked around as if waking from a dream they hadn't realized they were dreaming. He passed the post office. A boy played outside with a stick like it was a sword. He laughed, and for a moment Caleb thought he saw something shimmer behind the boy. A girl in uniform, watching, smiling, then gone. Silas Dart died that evening. They found him sitting upright in his chair, eyes closed, a small smile on his face. A charcoal drawing still clutched in his hand. Not of symbols, not of mouths, but of Eleanor, playing her violin beneath a sky full of stars. Caleb stayed in England one more week. He helped Agnes gather the remaining documents. Together they burned the old journals, the maps, the photos that carried too much grief. But not all of it. He kept the letter from his mother. And the ribbon. When he and Eleanor said goodbye, it was quiet. There were no grand declarations, just the understanding that some journeys never truly end. "You'll hear it again," she said, "the music. But don't be afraid." He nodded. "Only memory now." She squeezed his hand. "That's all any of us ever were." She returned to London under a new name, a clean name, free. Caleb boarded the ship back to America with nothing in his luggage but paper and silence, but in his chest a story, and a promise that the cycle was over. Behind him St. Elora no longer stood, but what it took. would never be taken again. He wrote it on a Sunday. Rain tapped softly on the windows of his apartment in Chicago. The city hummed beyond the glass. Car horns, footsteps, a saxophone drifting up from the street corner. But inside, Caleb wrote by hand. To my daughter, you aren't here yet. I don't know what color your eyes will be, or what songs you'll love, or what dreams will pull you through dark nights. But I want you to know something before the world gets louder, before memory gets rewritten, softened, or erased. There was a place called St. Elora Academy. It stood in England, surrounded by fog and silence, and for more than 60 years it devoured light. Not with teeth, not with fire, but with forgetting. Every 7 years a girl vanished, and for a long time no one asked why. One of those girls was Eleanor Whitaker. My aunt, your great-aunt, a violinist, a sister, a daughter. A story cut short. But stories, I've learned, do not end when the last page is turned. Sometimes they wait, in the cracks, in the quiet, in the chords of an unfinished song. He paused, looked out the window, then continued. I went to that place. I stood where she stood. I heard her music long after her hands had stilled, and I saw what no one dared speak aloud, what silence covered for generations. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a curse. It was a hunger built by neglect, by ambition, by the cruel belief that brilliance should be bartered for legacy. But she fought. Even in the dark, even when the world forgot her, she fought. And in the end, we remembered her into freedom. That's what I want you to know. That memory is power. That truth is a kind of music. And that every name deserves to be carried forward, not as a tragedy, but as a voice. He signed his name, folded the letter, placed it in a box beside the ribbon, now pale and soft with age. Then he stood, walking to the bookshelf. A photo rested there, Eleanor as a girl standing by the window with her violin. The light had caught her mid-laugh, not posed, not prepared, just real. He smiled. Outside, thunder rolled gently across the skyline. He closed the blinds. Later that night, he stood in the hallway of his building as neighbors passed. A girl in a green coat skipped down the stairs, humming something Caleb didn't recognize. But it was sweet, unburdened. And as she turned the corner, he thought he heard the echo of strings, not haunted, not sorrowful, but soft and warm, alive. And that was enough. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of its silence and the hope in its resolution, don't forget to subscribe. We bring you stories like this every week, forgotten places, buried truths, and the voices that deserve to be heard again. And if you're ready for more, there's another mystery waiting for you. Just click the video on your screen. It might change the way you see everything.